Did Charles Leclerc go up to the podium in Austria on the merit of the car, or was another mirage of Ferrari in his eternal struggle to return to the top? Today we reveal the truth behind the most misleading podium of the season. Charles Leclerc had a golden opportunity. He classified second, a position that in any other pointer team would result in a direct threat for victory. But from the moment the lights went out, the narrative fractured. In the first curve he lost the position with Oscar Piastri, and from there the Monegasque race entered a defensive dynamic. It was no longer a struggle to move forward but to keep what I had. Leclerc, far from deploying a strategic offensive, was forced to adapt to a rhythm that he clearly did not dictate. This situation, more than an individual problem, exposed Ferrari's inability to sustain a leadership position under direct pressure from rivals such as McLaren. The career dynamics was revealing. While McLaren managed his two cars fluently and Mercedes kept stalking with a solid rhythm, Leclerc had to run constantly looking through the mirrors. He had no car to attack Piastri, nor the technical or strategic advantage to bother Norris. What it did was temple and clean execution. And that is where the true merit of his podium lies, in the ability to maximize a package that, however updated it was still inferior. Rhythm management, tire protection, and career reading were fundamental, but were not born from a dominant situation, but of the need to survive in an environment that does not forgive failures. To all this, an emotional factor of great weight was added. Ferrari needed results to contain the media pressure. The atmosphere within the team was tense, not only because of the results, but because internally they knew that the car, despite aerodynamic improvements, was not yet ready to compete for real victory. The engineers knew it, the strategists knew, and more importantly, the pilots knew. Leclerc's career was more a surgical operation than a front assault. Precise, measure, without margin for error. And all this happened in a weekend where the weather, the track temperature, and the pressure on the calendar played their part. Austria is not just any clue. It is the home of Red Bull and therefore a symbolically hostile terrain for Ferrari. To go out with a podium of that circuit may seem an achievement, but in reality it was just a containment of the damage. Leclerc knew it from the checkered flag. His body language said everything. There was no celebration, only resignation before an awkward truth. They had arrived with hope, but they left knowing that they still lacked to be at the level of the best. Ferrari knew that Austria's Grand Prix could not be another weekend of excuses. Therefore, it led to Red Bull Ring what was internally qualified as its most ambitious evolution of the 2025 season. It was not a simple improvement package, but an aerodynamic reconstruction of the SF25 that redefined the way in which the car interacted with the asphalt. The central point was the new car of the car, a key component in the current technical regulation, where the generation of aerodynamic load through the soil effect is everything. The modification was deep. Ferrari not only redesigned the outer contour of the floor, but intervened in the four key areas that define their performance: the frontal deflectors, the central body of the floor, the side edges, and the rear diffuser. Each of these sections was adjusted with millimeter precision to maximize the aerodynamic seal of the lower air flow, thus reducing the load losses in medium and high-speed curves. Particularly, new profiles were introduced at the edges of the floor to improve the control of vortices, seeking greater directional stability without sacrificing the flexibility of the car in the face of height changes. In the central section, known as boat section, a new cavity design was implemented with volume and geometry adjustments, which allowed to redistribute the air to the side tunnels more efficiently. This modification was aimed at offering greater load without compromising the general balance. However, the key was in the edge wing, which now had a more aggressive behavior in variable load sections. In theory, this should allow Leclerc and Hamilton squeeze the car without decompensating in braking or in lateral support. In practice, the improvement was partial. Although in classification the SF25 showed clear signs of progress, the second position of Leclerc was no accident dash. In a rhythm, the results did not reach internal expectations. The car was still showing instability when entering a curve with a full tank, and the intermittent survival peaks were maintained, especially in the second and third sector of the circuit. This revealed that the new design, although successful in terms of peak load, had not yet solved the problems of progressivity and adaptation to different pilot height configurations. In addition, the new floor seemed to respond more effectively in controlled environments such as classification, where the car fits a single round. But in stint-long, under variable temperature and pressure conditions, inconsistencies arose that limited the full use of this redesign. The correlation between the wind tunnel and the real behavior still did not close, a ghost that Ferrari has been dragging for years. Internally, the data collected in Austria were valuable. Not only confirmed that the new specification has potential, but identified critical areas that require immediate evolution. The technical team, headed by Enrico Cardile, is already working on a review of the extremes of the diffuser and the treatment of secondary flows in the exhaust areas of vortices. The objective is to find a definitive solution to the problem of aerodynamic balance that compromises the efficiency of the car in race conditions. In short, what Austria made it clear is that Ferrari advances but still does with crutches. Its technical evolution was as promising as incomplete. One step forward, yes, but still insufficient to close the gap with McLaren and Red Bull. And most importantly, this new floor represents the direction that Ferrari must follow if he wants to win again, but also evidences that there is no time for another half update. The margin of error at this stage of the season no longer exists. If there is silent evidence that Ferrari is not yet up to the technical elite of Formula One in 2025, it is the constant use of the lift and coast. This technique, in simple appearance, hides a much deeper structural problem. It is a maneuver in which the pilot raises the foot of the accelerator before reaching the optimal braking point, allowing the car to reduce the speed naturally before entering curve. But do not deceive themselves. This is not a voluntary strategy for efficiency or savings. In Ferrari, it is an obligation imposed by the fragility of SF25 design. The alarming thing is not that Leclerc or Hamilton have to manage the car with this method. The truly worrying is why they have to do it. And the answer is as technical as serious. The abnormal wear of the measuring blocks of the flat background, also known as the plates, crucial components that determine if the car fits the regulation in terms of minimum height with respect to the ground. Already in China, Ferrari paid with disqualifications this carelessness. Since then, they cannot risk another sanction of that caliber. And the result is that their pilots must raise their foot ahead of time, compromising their career rhythm to protect a part of the car that should endure without intervention. Charles Leclerc was transparent after the race in Austria. He said the car was very difficult to drive, especially during the first stint. He was not referring to the balance or the engine response, but to how anti-natural it was to have to drive with tactical restrictions imposed by structural limitations. For a pilot like him, accustomed to stop late, to maintain an aggressive line and to squeeze each curve to the limit, be forced to adopt a more conservative style for reasons outside its control is a sentence. It's like asking a violinist to play a symphony with one less rope. At the technical level, this states that Ferrari has not yet found a way to optimize the structural rigidity of its flat bottom without compromising aerodynamic performance. In other words, they have a design that works only when it takes care of it more than it demands. As long as that does not change, Ferrari will continue to run with a tied hand. And that is the real invisible toll they are paying. One that is not seen in the podiums, but that explains why, despite improving, they are still far from being champions. The podium of Charles Leclerc in Austria was not the reflection of a dominant car or the symbol of a redeemed Ferrari. It was a clear sample of what happens when the pilot's talent faces, and partly exceeds, the technical limitations of the team. It was also a humility lesson for Maranello. Because behind that third position there is a painful truth that neither the trophy can hide. Ferrari is still running to keep afloat, not to lead. Leclerc crossed the finish line without raising his arms, without euphoria gestures. His gaze, his body language said everything. There was no real celebration, just a break. A temporal relief in a season that is still a sea of uncertainty. In the heart of the paddock, while the engineers analyzed the data and the strategists discussed the decisions, the environment was containment. Yes, they had achieved the podium. But they also knew that McLaren played in another league that day. And if it were not for the wear of tires in Mercedes or the errors of Red Bull, the result could have been very different. In the background, Austria was not a leap forward. It was a step that barely avoided retreating more. Because despite the aerodynamic redesign, the promises of evolution, of the tireless work of the engineers and the superhuman effort of Leclerc on track, Ferrari's technical reality remains plagued by limitations. The SF25 is a car with potential, yes, but also with fundamental contradictions that have not yet been resolved. And that internal fight between what the car wants to be and what it can actually offer is what this race marked. Ferrari cannot afford to repeat the narrative of previous seasons. They cannot continue accumulating podiums that come more due to external circumstances than by internal merit. And Leclerc, in his maturity as a pilot, knows it. His statement after the race was clear, firm, almost painful. We cannot be satisfied with a third place. Because it's not just about adding points but about building trust. And trust, in Formula One, is based on technical certainties, not on circumstantial results. The road to victory is still long. Austria was a sign of life but not a declaration of strength. Ferrari has a challenge that goes beyond aerodynamic or strategic.